to Secret Weapons, and today we're taking a look at The Many Worlds by Catalinbread. I think this is the first dedicated phaser video I've done here on this channel. We've done a couple of flangers, a few choruses, and a fair amount of multi-effects here that has required us to cover phaser in some capacity along the way, but I don't think we've ever done a dedicated phaser before. Enter The Many Worlds by Catalinbread, an 8-stage phaser with 8 different LFO options for crafting your sound, including 3 very, very unique options that I think are very cool and really impart some uniqueness to this device in a world where it feels like things like phaser and flanger can be rehashes and retreads of the same classic circuits over and over again. While this did allegedly start off as an homage to kind of classic phasers, the inclusion of all of these different LFOs gives it a unique modern voice. But the big thing, as we stated, are some of the weird LFO options this thing has. And in that, you have the envelope up, envelope down, and battle mode. Envelopes up and down react in real time to your playing to control the intensity of the phaser. And battle mode is a really cool and unique thing where you have 2 sine waves that can be set at 2 different rates, allowing for some kind of hard to predict non-traditional rhythmic elements in a phaser, which I think might be one of my standout modes in this thing, because if you've seen me cover choruses and flangers in the past, you know that one of the things that I don't like about a lot of modulation is the predictability of knowing exactly where your peak and your trough is, and knowing that it's always going to bounce rhythmically the same way every time. It can have its place, especially if it's very slow and very subtle, but I generally don't find myself super drawn to really predictable effects like that. And I think that the envelopes up and down and the battle mode do an amazing job of kind of shaking things up and creating a fresh approach to using phaser, especially in an ambient context. A couple other things about this pedal. You've got your basic controls, your frequency, your depth, and your feedback. You've got a mix control, which is really useful. The mix taper on this thing is very, very well stacked. You can get things really subtle or get things really exaggerated with a lot of control between the two, allowing you to get just the amount of phase that you want in a pedal like this. And lastly, this thing can run at 9 and 18 volts. I would recommend 18 volts, higher headroom. That was the one thing I noticed, was when I was running it at 9 volts, I was quickly running out of clean headroom in this pedal, putting things like, I didn't use these in the video, but like during some of my testing, I was using things like the Maris Enzo, which runs pretty hot. And I felt like some of my low notes were getting pretty crunchy. So if you pick one of these up, definitely try it at 18 volts. Highly recommend it. I think it opens up really beautifully at 18 volts. I love this kind of thing because there's not a lot else to say. It's a phaser. It sounds great. There's a bunch of modes. We can't really talk anymore right in this context. We have to just go to the pedal board. So let's go ahead and dive into our sound samples. Before we jump into some sound samples, let's go ahead and talk through our context. I am playing a Jennings Voyager into a Cali 76 compressor and a Limelight V2 by Electronic Audio Experiments. From there, we go to the Many Worlds and the Belle Epoch Deluxe from Catalinbread, and then a Silktone amplifier running into a Universal Audio aux box. From there, we're going to our DAW, and along the way, we've got a plate reverb in stereo being provided by the aux. So let's go ahead and give that a listen right now. The boost from the Limelight and the Cali 76 compressor are both on. So the way we're going to tackle the Many Worlds right now is to run through each of the waveforms, and along the way we'll do a little bit of knob turning to try to find my ideal sound for each waveform, because they each take on a very dramatically different characteristic than the one before it. And then we'll really get into some serious knob turning when we get to the envelope up, the envelope down, and the battle mode. But we'll kind of build some different sounds and some different levels of subtlety along the way. I find that I always really prefer subtlety when it comes to things like phasers, flangers, and chorus. Uh, Slower typically appeals to me. Medium depth with a really slow, like weight, like with a really slow envelope tends to be the way that I dial stuff like this in. We'll try to not do that the whole way through, but on a sine wave, that's definitely the direction I always take things. Let's jump over to that square wave. Triangle. Like I said earlier, it is fascinating how, despite this being the same phaser throughout, you get such dramatically different voices with the different LFOs. Maybe that's fundamental to what we're doing here, and I just don't know that much about phasers, but I do appreciate that the different waveforms take on such dramatically different characteristics. This is Sawtooth, which is basically a ramp up with a like a triangle ramp up with a square wave drop off. And these get into these kind of like subtle rhythmic modes that I really like. I think they work really, really well with a more ambient sound. I really like the interplay between like a good delay and a good modulation ahead of it, especially something with a cool rhythmic component like the Many Worlds, because it almost gets out of the way completely, but you would totally miss it if it was gone. Let's give that same sound a listen without the Many Worlds. And conversely, we have the reverse sawtooth, which is essentially square wave up and triangle down. Okay, so we are now entering the part of this pedal that I think is the most interesting, brings the most to the table, and kind of has kind of what I would call to be like the calling card sounds in the Many Worlds. The stuff that when I saw the manual, the stuff that really jumped out at me: envelope up, envelope down, and battle mode. In these modes, frequency turns into attack, which basically decides how quickly the LFO reacts to your playing. For context, in the envelope up and down, your playing dynamics decide the intensity of the Many Worlds, which is why we've turned the compressor off for this part of the video. And your depth control turns into your sensitivity, which basically determines how much of your attack needs to kind of hit the pedal for it to react. So let's set a nice fast attack and high sensitivity. Let's turn off the Limelight too, just so that we're getting... and a slower attack. It's almost kind of got like an auto wah feel to it. And then this is the kind of inverse of that, where as your dynamics fade away, the effect gets more exaggerated, which I actually think I like more because it kind of like allows the decay of your guitar to get really interesting, where like the meat of things stays a little bit more focused. And that brings us to battle mode, the most exaggerated piece of this pedal, wherein your depth control turns into frequency 2, and your top 2, center and left controls basically become frequency 1 and frequency 2 of 2 competing sine waves that create some really, really interesting and exaggerated textures. See, we're in a territory where I like to take the mix nice and low and keep things pretty slow and not super heavy on the feedback side of things. Just because this one gets really, very soupy very, very quickly. But I do love the unpredictability of the two waveforms hitting each other. add a stereo delay here at the end too. We're just gonna get real ambient with this because I think that something like the battle mode, in my mind at least, is at its best when you're really obfuscating it with a bunch of wet effects, and it just adds movement in the midst of everything else. And again, let's take that out and hear what a difference adding that movement, even with the mix low like we have it right now, what a difference that makes.